The U.S. government seized control of insurance giant AIG, American International Group, in an unprecedented $85 billion bailout. The Federal Reserve made the deal Tuesday to save AIG from collapse in what the New York Times describes as the most radical intervention in private business in the central bank's history. The unprecedented run of events has altered the shape of Wall Street and brings the total amount of government rescue efforts to stabilize the financial system and housing market to about $900 billion.
AIG was acting not simply as an insurance company, it was acting as a speculative investment bank / hedge fund, as was Bear Stearns, as was Lehman Brothers, as is what will become Bank of America Merrill Lynch. So you have a situation where it's bailing out not just the money, but taking on the risk of items it cannot even begin to understand, because if it had understood them, this would never have gotten to the point to which it has gotten.
How did
It's about taking on too much leverage, in borrowing to take on the risk, and borrowing again and borrowing again. 25 to 30 times the amount of capital, the amount of money that they had to basically back the borrowing that they were doing. Human, regular borrowers cannot do this. This is something that is an item only of the banking industry. And not only was all that borrowing happening, but there was no transparency to the Fed, to the SEC, to the Treasury, to anyone who would have even bothered to look as to how much of a catastrophe was being created, so that when anything fell, whether it was a subprime mortgage or whether it was a credit complex security, it was all below a pile of immense, interlocked, incestuous borrowing. And that's what is bringing down the entire banking system.
Michael Hudson, we're talking government bailout, which means taxpayers stuck with the bill. Do you think this is the right move?
No, it's the worst possible move. Wall Street's been preparing for this for years, because every financial analyst knows that the debts can't be paid. And the question that Wall Street has, if you're going to take a gamble on bad debts that can't be paid, how are you going to come out a winner? And there's only one way of coming out a winner, and that's to make the government bail you out. This has been known for years because it's inherent almost in the mathematics of compound interest. Every banker I know knew that the loans they were making were going to go bad. They were trying to sell them to somebody else, ultimately expecting them to end up with some sovereign wealth fund. And now McCain saying that this is the result of fraud and incompetence. The government's now bailed them out, but by bailing them out, Wall Street was coming to terms with the bad debts. When Bear Stearns went under and when Lehman Brothers went under, this began to wipe away the bad debts. And when the debts exceed the ability to pay, there's only one thing any economy can do, and that's wipe them out. Instead, the government is trying to keep the fiction alive, and what Paulson did yesterday in bailing out AIG was to try to lock in whoever is the next president, not only to further bailouts of Wall Street, ostensibly to protect the public money, but to make it impossible to write down the debts of the 4 million homeowners that are expected to default this year, impossible to write down the debts of companies that have issued junk bonds, impossible for the country to get rid of this excess of debts that can't be repaid, and you're having really a war now of creditors against debtors. And this is what Wall Street's been preparing for. It needed an emergency to do it. It's really not an emergency at all. This has been building up for many years. Everybody expected it, and breathlessly now the Secretary of Treasury.
But of course the argument was if you don't bail out AIG, it could lead to a global financial meltdown.
It's a meltdown of the gamblers, as Naomi said. These are people who've gambled. You had McCain saying they're gamblers. If these people have gambled, we're talking about derivative trades, billions of dollars of bets on which way interest rates will go, billions of dollars of bad loans beyond the ability of debtors to pay. Why on earth would you want to bail out these creditors?
So what would happen if you didn't?
Then you would prepare the ground for writing down the debts of the homeowners that have no way of repaying the exploding mortgages. Those interest rates are going to be jumping up this year. You'd be able to bring the debts down to the ability of the economy to pay, and you'd save these 4 million homeowners from defaulting and being kicked out of their houses. Now they're going to be kicked out of the houses. The houses will be vacant. The cities are going to now say, gee, we're going going to have to cut the property taxes to enable the debts to be paid to save the financial system. So if they cut the property taxes, they're going to have to cut back local expenditures, local infrastructure. The economy is being sacrificed to pay the gamblers.
It's insane, actually. It's bad math, and it's a bad precedent, because they're not simply bailing it out with putting taxpayers' money through the Fed into taking on the risks of these companies. They're taking on risks. They're not bailing out and selling debt. They're taking on the risk. The Fed is continuing to become a larger and larger hedge fund. And it's doing it with taxpayer money, and it's doing it with the future debt of the United States. So for the one thing, they're not attaching any rules to these bailouts. You know, you bail out Bear Stearns. Effectively, you're putting up $30 billion to take Bear Stearns' junk and say, all right, we'll back the junk. J.P. Morgan Chase, you take Bear Stearns. We'll back whatever junk is there. But there's no decision to say, but you know, you got to tell us what's there. And J.P. Morgan, by the way, as you're taking on this bank, you have to explain to us what you really have. And Bank of America, you have to explain to us what your risks are. I know that at Bank of America they were struggling with their own risks and trying to figure out what was going on in their own company. And now they've assumed Merrill Lynch. That creates a tremendous institution where the Fed is now obligated, when that starts to have more and more trouble, which it will.
What started all this?
What started all this is a complete lack of transparency and regulation in the banking system. If we go back to a history where we had a similar situation on Wall Street, which was 1929, when we had a stock market crash followed by a Great Depression. In 1932, when FDR was elected and Herbert Hoover was ousted, right after that, we put together
But interestingly, FDR didn't come in on a plank of changing everything the way he did. It happened, didn't it, after he became president?
He had to take a look at the banking system, which was undermining the general economy, which had undermined the general economy, and say, you know what, we do not understand what's going on here. We have two types of banks. We have speculating investment banks, and we have commercial banks that deal with the public, take deposits, take savings, make mortgage loans, understand what's going on. We'll back those. The government will back those commercial institutions that deal with the public. It will not back speculative investment banks. And by the way, those two things have to split. You pick a side. You want to be an investment bank, you be an investment bank. You want to be a commercial bank, we'll back you. The Fed will back you. We will be there. We'll create an insurance company, the FDIC, to back deposits for the public. We'll have your back. There was no agreement to have the back of the speculative investment banks. Over the years, these things have merged and merged and merged. And in late 1999, Glass-Steagall, that act was repealed, killed, died in Congress. And now you have a situation where everything that went wrong up until the creation of that act is happening now with a lot more capital and a lot more international interplay and a lot more money on the federal government to have to bail out when things go wrong.
Glass-Steagall was designed to prevent what has happened. It was designed to keep investment banking apart from commercial banking. Now you have the banking system merging with the most crooked companies in the country, like Countrywide Financial, that's under indictment by attorney generals all over the country. You're having the banking system commit its deposits and its base to recycle the savings not into industrial investment, but into exploitive loans.
So we've gone backwards in banking history, and having Merrill be a part of Bank of America is a tremendously big accident waiting to happen. Bear Stearns' assets part of J.P. Morgan. They're all part of recombining speculation and commercial.
While employees, shareholders, and other victims are left with nothing but trouble and debt, the people who helped cause the collapse make off with tens of millions in severance packages. Disgraceful. I've spoken out against the excess of corporate executives, and I can assure you that if I'm president, we're not going to tolerate that anymore.
Professor Hudson.
His constituency are the people who've caused the crisis. That's who he's representing. Now, of course, you're not going to come in and say, I'm going to support the people who've caused this crisis at your expense. If you're going to bail out your constituency, you're going to say exactly the opposite. So what he's saying has no reality at all. These are the people who are saying there is no money for Social Security. We're going to have to privatize it. We're going to have to turn over your Social Security to Bear Stearns, to AIG, to the very people who've shown how they're mismanaging money. Imagine if the Republican program had gone through and Social Security had been privatized and these were the jokers who were managing your Social Security.